The veil between the physical and the eternal is thinner than we dare believe. We walk about this world with the illusion of solidity, of permanence, of space and time neatly ordered like books on a shelf. We speak of here and there, now and then, as though these were truths etched into the fabric of reality. But they are not. They are conveniences human constructs. The soul, which is the breath of the eternal, does not acknowledge these limits, and death, which we treat as a wall, is in fact more akin to a curtain, thin, sheer, and fluttering in a wind we do not yet understand. Many presume that when the body ceases, the soul departs in a thunderclap of finality, a clean separation between this life and the next. But this view is born from the narrow lens of physical thinking. If a man were to lose his sight, he would say the world has disappeared. But the world has not changed, only his ability to perceive it has. So it is with death. The living say, they are gone, but they are not gone, they are veiled. Not absent, but obscured, and not from reality, but from perception. It would be a comfortless theology that teaches the soul flees the earth, like a startled bird, severed from all it once knew, abandoned to drift in a realm of clouds and hymns. That is not the soul's nature. The soul is anchored not to places, but to meaning. Where it has loved, where it has suffered, where it has poured itself out, there it lingers, not from a failure to move on, but from the holy gravity of memory and affection. The soul may not have hands, but it leaves fingerprints on everything it touches, and those marks remain warm long after the soul has crossed through the curtain. We are wrong to ask how long in the same way we ask how long it takes to bake bread or paint a fence. Duration belongs to the ticking clock, not to the eternal. When we ask how long a soul remains on earth, we assume it has left in the same way a train departs a station. But the soul is not a passenger in time, it is a being in the eternal now. Its presence is not measured in hours, but in echoes. It does not leave with a footstep, it withdraws like a tide, and like the tide, it returns, sometimes subtly, sometimes with a force that overtakes the shore of our awareness. Those who have sat in silent rooms after a great loss know of what I speak. There are moments, quiet, fleeting, but undeniable, when the air shifts, when the unseen makes itself known, when the stillness feels too full. Is it memory? Is it imagination? Perhaps, but there is more truth in the imagination than we dare admit. It is often not the mind, but the soul within us that recognizes the familiar shadow of another soul. And it does so without evidence, without reason, without proof, only with the deep knowing that says, you are still near. It is not the dead who haunt the living. It is love. It is unfinished conversation. It is forgiveness still waiting to be spoken aloud. The soul remains because there is something yet to say, or something so deeply said that it will echo for 1,000 years. Some souls linger like sunlight on a room long after the sun has dipped below the horizon. You do not see it directly, but the room is not dark. Others remain like songs that cannot be unsung, like truths that, once heard, cannot be unheard. And then there are those who feel nothing at all, who say they are gone and believe it without hesitation. But absence is not proof of departure. Some souls leave quietly because they have said all they needed. Others wait nearby not to cling but to comfort. The difference lies not in the departed but in the living. One man sees only an empty chair. Another feels the weight of invisible company. This is not superstition. It is sensitivity. A heart attuned to eternity hears whispers where others hear silence. What is more humbling, more mysterious, than the thought that the dead are not elsewhere but elsewhere, that they inhabit not a distant land, but a dimension enfolded into our own, that every act of love, of mourning, of remembrance is not a message sent into the dark, but a dialogue across the veil. We have made death too final, too cold, too mathematical. We treat the departure of a soul like the extinguishing of a candle, when in truth it is more like the setting of a star, no longer visible, yet still burning with power beyond reckoning. This is not metaphor, this is metaphysics. The soul, once born, is not erased, it is not diminished, it is not dismissed. Its connection to the earth is not severed by death, only transformed. It walks among us in ways we cannot measure, whispering through conscience, humming through memory, haunting not to terrify but to testify. The soul remains not in bondage but in presence, not to linger in sorrow but to remind us that eternity is not later. It is now. Time is a creature. The soul is not bound by it. We speak of time as though it were the highest authority, the master of all things, the force that drags us forward and leaves all else behind. But time is not sovereign. It is not eternal. It is in fact one of the things that was made. Time had a beginning. It was born when matter was born. It is a river that began with a source, not an infinite sea. And like all things made, it will one day end. But the soul, fashioned in the image of the eternal, does not run according to the clock's logic. It does not tick forward second by second, hour by hour. It abides, it watches, it remembers, but it does not age. To ask how long a soul remains is to ask how long sunlight lasts in a place where there is no night. It is a question shaped by the wrong kind of awareness. You cannot apply a ruler to a whisper or measure eternity by the wristwatch. We are creatures of dust and chronology, and so we assume that everything that is real must move as we move, start as we start, stop as we stop. But the soul does not follow these lines. It exists in a realm where moments are not counted but known, where presence is not limited by location, where nearness is not measured in miles but in meaning. When we consider the soul after death, we must free ourselves from this tyranny of time. It does not make sense to ask if a soul remains for 1 week or 1 year or 10. That is like asking how long a color sings or how many miles joy can travel. These are not temporal realities. They are spiritual ones. The soul, once freed from the body, is also freed from the clock, and yet it remains connected, not because it is bound, but because it loves. And love is stronger than time. It does not forget, it does not diminish, it is not withered by days or decades, it burns with the same light whether 10 minutes or 10 centuries have passed. We are told that for God, 1 day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like a day. This is not poetry, it is a clue. Time is useful for the body, for decay, for rest, for growth, but it is not necessary for the soul. The soul does not decay. It remembers, it learns, it perceives, but it does not crumble. That which is spiritual has no expiry date. And so the soul does not move on in the way we think, departing like a guest who checks the clock and excuses themselves. The soul moves differently. It leans into eternity. It is drawn by meaning, not by minutes. It may be that from the soul's perspective there is no gap between life and life beyond. A breath here, a breath there, and both are real. What seems like death to us may be, to the soul, a deepening of awareness, a sharpening, not a severing. In that case, the soul does not even recognize that it has left, only that it has stepped more fully into truth. And if that is true, then the presence of the soul is not something that fades, but something that continues, quietly, patiently, and without regard for our clocks. We must learn to think as eternal creatures. We are not just animals with calendars, we are souls with memory and longing. The ache we feel after someone dies is not simply grief, it is the soul's protest against time. We feel, even if we do not understand it, that time should not have stolen them from us, that love should be exempt, that connection should persist, and we are right. That sense of injustice is not weakness, it is truth speaking. The soul does not belong to time, and therefore its presence is not erased by time's passing. You may sit beside a grave and feel something more than memory. You may walk into an old room and feel the air heavy with someone who once was. You may dream, and in that dream hear the voice of one long gone, but not gone at all. Is that illusion? Is that madness? Or is it perhaps the soul refusing to be filed away into the past? Perhaps it is the eternal brushing up against the temporary, reminding us that we were made for more than this hourglass existence. There are moments when time feels thin, when a scent, a sound, a sudden thought opens something in us that feels outside the ordinary sequence of days. That, too, is a gift. It is a crack in the armor of chronology, a glimpse into the soul's realm. When you feel that someone is still with you, still near, not just in memory, but in some deeper way, you are not mistaken. You are remembering with more than your mind. You are perceiving something that time cannot touch. So we must not be too quick to assign deadlines to presence. We must not imagine that the grave binds the soul, or that the calendar can chase it away. The soul does not move on because time commands it. It moves with purpose. It stays with purpose. Indeed, it appears when needed. It lingers when love still calls it, and in that timeless patience there is a holy mystery we would do well to honor. There is a strange moment in the midst of grief, quiet, unbidden, when what we feel is not simply memory, but encounter. A brush with something real, alive, present. It is not just that we remember the one we've lost. It is that something in us seems to recognize them, sense them, even respond to them. Grief, we are told, is about looking backward, about holding on to what once was. But this is only half the truth. Sometimes grief feels more like a window than a mirror. It lets something in. It points to a presence, not just an absence. It does not simply ache with what is gone. It burns with what is still somehow here. We treat grief as if it were a wound to be healed, a brokenness to be corrected. But grief is not an error. It is evidence. It is the soul's testimony to love that did not end. And love, by its very nature, implies the continued presence of the beloved. If all we felt in grief were memory, it would fade as photographs do, blurred with time, pale with distance. But grief lingers. It sharpens when we least expect it. It returns in full force with the sound of a voice, the scent of a room, the way a shadow falls across a wall. These are not mere triggers of recollection. They are signs of recognition. There is a knowing in grief that we cannot explain. A sense that what we mourn is not buried but veiled. That the person we have lost has not ceased to be, but simply slipped into the edges of our awareness. When a child loses a parent, they often still speak to them. Not because they don't understand death, but because they do. They intuit with a clarity unspoiled by logic that the person is not nowhere, they are somewhere, and somehow still listening, still seeing, still connected. And the child grieves, not just because they remember, because they know. They recognize the presence they can no longer hold. We feel this most acutely in the stillness. Grief loves silence, not because silence is empty, but because it is full. In the quiet, the mind stops rehearsing facts and the soul begins to listen, and what it hears is not always its own voice. It hears the echo of the other, the cadence of words once spoken, the feeling of someone near. That is not memory alone. That is the soul responding to a presence that does not obey the rules of flesh and time. And that response is not madness, not delusion, but recognition. To recognize is more than to recall. It is to perceive something as real in the now. We recognize the face of a friend across a crowd. We recognize the sound of a loved one's laughter in the next room. In grief, this recognition happens without the senses, but not without truth. Something in the deep places of us leaps towards something familiar, and the ache that follows is not just longing, it is response. The grief is not only for what was lost, but for what is sensed and cannot be fully embraced. This is why grief feels alive. It moves, it speaks, it changes shape. One day it sits like a weight on the chest, and the next it hums like a chord we cannot quite resolve. We do not simply think of them, we feel them. We feel when they are near. We feel when they are missed. We feel when the world moves on and they do not. And none of this can be explained by biology alone. These are the stirrings of a soul that is reaching across something thinner than we thought. We say that grief is love with nowhere to go, but that is untrue. Grief is love that still knows exactly where to go. It simply cannot arrive in the same form. It still seeks the one it loves. It still speaks. It still listens. And sometimes if we are still enough, if we are quiet and open and honest, we find that the love we send is met by something beyond ourselves. A warmth, a clarity, a sense, not an answer perhaps, but not a silence either. Why else would a room still carry their presence long after they are gone? Why else would certain moments feel heavy with more than memory? Why does the heart stir when no word is spoken, when no image presents itself, when only the sense of them hovers near? Because grief, when it is true, does not lie. It reveals, it does not fabricate. Rather, it testifies. The tears we shed are not just for the past. They are a response to the nearness of someone who has crossed the boundary, but not the bond. And this is perhaps the great secret grief whispers to us. They are not far. The ones we have loved and lost are not simply echoes of what was. They are companions on a path we are still walking. We mourn because we feel the separation, yes, but we also mourn because we feel their nearness and cannot reach. And that is not insanity. That is not weakness. That is not mere sentiment. It is the soul recognizing another soul just beyond the veil. There is a gravity to a life once lived that does not dissipate with the death of the body. It remains, diffuse, invisible, yet deeply present. Like the scent of a fire long extinguished or the warmth left in a room long after its guest has departed, the echo of a soul's presence shapes the world it leaves behind, not as a ghost haunting rooms, but as a moral force, an enduring resonance that continues to inform, to guide, to press upon the hearts of the living in ways they do not always recognize. Every life, no matter how quiet, sends ripples into the world, into the lives it touched, the choices it shaped, the love it gave or withheld. These are not forgotten when breath stops. In fact, death often sharpens them. What we failed to notice while they lived becomes painfully clear when they are gone. Their laughter, their convictions, their quiet strength or fiery courage, all these settle into the spaces they once inhabited. They become part of the air, not in a poetic sense, but in a spiritual and moral one. Their echo becomes a pressure on the soul, a reminder, a standard, a call. We have all heard a voice in our minds that was not ours. The voice of a mother reminding us to be kind, the tone of a father or mentor urging us to speak the truth even when it hurts, the gentle but firm presence of a friend who always stood beside us in the storm, still felt when we are tempted to drift. These are not hallucinations. These are echoes. The moral atmosphere of our lives is thick with the residue of those who have come before us, and this residue is not passive. It is formative. Just as the wind cannot be seen but is known by the way it bends the trees, so too the presence of the departed cannot be measured but is felt in the way it bends our will toward what is good. The soul leaves behind more than memories, it leaves behind influence. We often imagine the dead as having departed to some distant realm, no longer concerned with the happenings of this world. But what if they are more present than we think, not through surveillance, but through legacy, through the imprint they left on our character, our conscience, our inner voice? You have likely felt this, the hesitation before an action, when the memory of someone noble enters your mind and arrests your hand. The courage summoned when you recall what someone endured and how they bore it with grace. The laughter you refuse to stifle because you remember someone who lived freely and taught you that joy is not frivolous but holy. These are moral reinforcements. These are echoes doing their work. And the soul, even absent from the body, continues to shape the world through these gentle urgings and silent nudges. The ancient world understood this better than we do. They spoke of ancestors not as vanished, but as guiding presences, not gods, but not gone either. Their wisdom remained in stories, in rituals, in values passed from lips now silenced. And though we no longer build altars, we still feel this same thing. We still light candles, still keep photos on the wall, still find ourselves doing things because she would have wanted it, or he would have done it this way. These are not just habits of grief, they are acts of moral memory. And they shape us more than any law or custom. We do not live in a vacuum. We breathe the invisible teachings of those who came before us, and some souls, by the sheer force of their love or virtue, saturate the air long after they have departed it. Think of the great ones, the reformers, the peacemakers, the saints and poets and quiet heroes whose names may never make history books, but who reshaped the lives of those around them. Their deaths did not conclude their influence. If anything, it amplified it. Because death has a way of distilling a life into its clearest truths. But this is not only true of the virtuous. The wicked leave echoes too, the cruelty of the violent, the bitterness of the selfish, the damage of the proud. These also ripple out. The moral atmosphere we breathe is not always sweet. Sometimes it is tainted. Sometimes it is heavy with the weight of what was done and left unredeemed. We inherit not just the love and wisdom of the departed, but their wounds as well. And this too is part of the mystery. The soul, even in its absence, continues to ask something of us. Will you repeat what I was? Will you repair what I broke? Will you carry forward the good or the grief? So the question is not whether the dead are gone. The question is, what of them remains in us? What do we carry forward, and how does it shape what we become? The echo of a soul is not simply a memory. It is a living challenge, a summons, sometimes a comfort, sometimes a burden, always a presence. We cannot escape it, and perhaps we are not meant to. For in that echo, felt in conscience, in choices, in the quiet shaping of our inner world, we are reminded that death is not the end of influence. The body dies, the voice falls silent, but the soul leaves fingerprints on our moral selves, and we in turn pass those impressions on. The soul once departed becomes not less present, but differently present, not loud but lasting, not near but everywhere. There is an instinct deep and old that tells us the boundary between this world and the next is not solid. It is not an impenetrable wall, but something more like a veil, translucent, shifting, easily disturbed by silence, memory, or love. We may not see through it clearly, but sometimes we feel the brush of something on the other side, a presence that does not speak in words, yet is known, a nearness that does not belong to time, yet pierces the moment like a sudden wind. The veil is. That is why we dream of the dead, and they do not seem distant. That is why a single scent can bring a soul into the room with a force more powerful than sight. That is why children in their innocence speak to those we insist are gone, and do not feel strange doing so. The separation between the living and the dead is not as absolute as we are taught to believe. It is real, yes, but it is not unbreachable, and it is not cruel. The separation exists to protect, not to punish, and even in that separation, presence remains. But here is the quiet truth. The soul observes more than it intervenes. It does not rush to change what we must learn. It does not force our hands or rework our lives. There is a holy restraint in its nearness. The soul knows now what we forget every day, that suffering has purpose, that time unfolds as it must, that love is not proven in rescue but in witness. And so, though the departed may be near, they are not disruptive, they are not meddlesome. Their nearness is not interference, it is presence without intrusion, love without control. Imagine watching someone you adore learning to walk across a tightrope. You know you could catch them. You know you could call out, warn, correct, change the path. But you also know that something deeper is being formed in the silence. The soul, once free from the body, sees with this kind of clarity. It watches not with indifference, but with understanding. And when it draws near, it does so not to command, but to accompany. The veil does not block this. It only filters it. That is why the signs we receive, when we do, are not loud. They are gentle. A dream, a whisper, a coincidence too exact to dismiss. A moment of peace in the middle of anguish that feels entirely foreign and entirely gifted. These are not the soul shouting. These are the soul remaining close without demanding to be seen. The departed do not come to prove themselves, because proof is not the point. Their presence is not for our analysis, it is for our comfort. It is to remind us that we are not alone, even when the world feels emptied of them. And yet we still long for more. We cry out, if only I could speak to them again, if only they could tell me something, anything. But perhaps they already are, not in sentences, but in stillness, not in intervention, but in impression. The soul does not need words to communicate. It only needs openness. And we, who are so used to noise, so trained to expect flashing lights and grand gestures, often miss the quiet ways the soul draws near. It is not because they do not love us that they do not intervene. It is because they now see the tapestry, while we still only see the threads. They see what must be allowed, what must be endured, what must be chosen freely. They see what we cannot yet understand. And in that knowledge they do not abandon us. They wait beside us, bearing the waiting with us. The soul that has crossed the veil becomes a kind of still witness, a silent companion on a road we must walk ourselves. This is not absence, this is restraint. And restraint is the language of eternal love. It is not distance, it is reverence. We ache for them, and yet they are nearer than our own breath. We wish they would speak, and yet they are speaking constantly, in the quiet of our conscience, in the warmth that suddenly floods us when we are breaking, in the courage that comes from nowhere when we need it most. They are there, not fixing our lives, but loving us through them, not altering our fate, but shaping our endurance. So no, the veil is not torn, and that is mercy. If it were torn, the weight of the next world. You grow, and they are still with you. You change, and their love adapts. You suffer, and their presence intensifies, not in miraculous rescues, but in quiet steadiness. You find yourself doing things they taught you, becoming someone they help shape, making choices. The soul does not hover in chains. It stays as a choice for love, for care, for completion. Not eternally, but faithfully. For as long as it takes, you have felt this perhaps, a sudden sense of calm in your worst moment, a presence when you are most alone, not dramatic, not loud. And though the world will try to comfort us with logic, with reasons, with theology, with distraction, none of it touches the center of that hollow, because grief is not a problem to be solved. It is the soul's echo in the hollow. It is the aftersound. Simply waiting until the conversation continues face to face. We often imagine the border between life and death as an impenetrable wall, a final curtain drawn with a cold and impersonal hand. We speak of the other side as if it were a faraway land we can never glimpse until we... The veil is a mercy, a soft boundary between two places that are closer than we realize, and every once in a while it thins, not to torment, not to tease, but to assure, to whisper, to remind us that it continues its journey not away from us, but into a new form that is perhaps more aligned with the true nature of its being. As the soul transforms, it does not forget its earthly experiences. It does not abandon the love it once gave and received, the joys and sorrows that shaped